I was like that Michael J. Fox character, and what was that, Family, whatever it was?
Family Ties.
Family Ties. Family Ties. I'd be walking around with the briefcase, and my brother and sister just be making fun of me. But
the picture of Richard Nixon on your wall.
I didn't go that far.
The green rush is real. From lawmakers and investment bankers to CEOs and investors, we'll look at how people are transforming cannabis from the shadows of the black market into a cash crop that draws in cannapreneurs from Hollywood to Wall Street. Here to help you navigate the business of cannabis, please welcome Louis Goldberg and Ann Donahoe, brought to you by KCSA Strategic Communications.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Green Rush. I'm Ann Donahoe, here with my co-host with the most, Louis Goldberg. Oh. And today we're talking money, cannabis, and getting kicked out of college and living off the grid. One quick note, if you can please rate and subscribe to The Green Rush on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcast from. We would really appreciate it. And make sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter with the handle @GreenRushComms. So today we're talking with Hadley Ford, the co-founder and CEO of iAnthus Capital. iAnthus owns 8 cultivation facilities, 5 processing facilities, and 41 dispensaries. In addition to that, iAnthus operates in 6 states. They are public on the Canadian Stock Exchange, and they trade under the symbol IAN. Full disclosure, iAnthus is a KCSA client. So now that that's all out of the way, thanks for joining us, Hadley. We're so happy to have you here.
Oh, I'm very happy to be here. Appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah. So before we get into the really fun stuff, can you, beyond what I just said, explain what exactly it is that iAnthus does?
Sure. We're an owner-operator of licensed cannabis companies across the United States. We're currently in 6 states. We have an East Coast addressable market of 48 million people with a weighted average number of competitors of 12, and we think we offer investors a tremendous diversified way to play the growth of the U.S. Cannabis market.
So you structured a public vehicle that raises money in Canada and uses that money to fund businesses in the U.S. How do U.S. bankers view you and your company?
U.S. Commercial bankers or investment bankers? Because you get 2 different views. The commercial banker side, I think people...
Both sides.
Oh, sure. So the commercial banker side, obviously, there's been a lot of stuff written about that. Boatloads of cash being wheeled around from one place to another. The commercial banks, I don't think they really care too much one way or another that we raise money in Canada. I think most of those guys are driven by some of the federal prohibitions against cannabis. On the investment banking side, it's a little bit of a different kettle of fish. You've got a number of institutions down here that are exceptionally curious. Not your big guys. You will see occasionally the Goldmans and Merrill bankers hanging out at conferences. But the smaller guys, it's probably 6 months away before someone does an underwriting. I think there's a lot of interest. People clearly recognize the growth opportunities. And I think the sort of, call it second-tier, scrappier investment banks will be in sometime this year.
So the big bank in Canada is Canaccord Genuity. They're the ones who do the majority of the underwriting. With you saying that you think maybe a Roth or a Cowen or somebody of that ilk possibly doing an underwriting in the U.S. within 6 months, what do you think Canaccord's reaction is going to be? Well,
Canaccord's been preemptive. They've hired a banker specifically for doing U.S. cannabis. They obviously have a presence down here. They're self-clearing in the U.S. They've got offices. They're a market maker in our stock. I would imagine you probably see more of a partnership piece rather than straight-up competition. It's an interesting industry that way, that a lot of the professional services companies don't have unfettered competition, so they tend to share information about what works, what doesn't work. So I would imagine if you saw a Cowen or a Roth or someone of that ilk come into the market, they'd probably be alongside a Canaccord in their first or second offering.
So I want to talk intellectual property for a minute. Thanks to the illegality of the U.S. market, currently you can't trademark or copyright your product or manufacture or distribute across state lines. How much IP is there in your business, and what are you doing now to protect it?
There's a lot of IP, obviously, know-how and ability to grow and process and package and all those good things. And there's a lot of IP in the brand. You can protect and consolidate and own IP that is separate from the actual plant itself. The difficulty you get is when you try and go out and trademark or copyright the actual name of a strain of cannabis. And because it's against the law from a federal perspective, you're not going to get too far in the copyright office. But if you show up with a way to do a certain process, or if you show up with a way to do something that's not touching a plant, you'll have much better progress. But we typically don't do that. We just typically take the IP, hold it in a separate company, and then lease that back to our operations.
Oh, that's really interesting. So as Ann and I were preparing for this, we went back into the archives and looked at a lot of what you said, and you're really eloquent about a lot of things. And you said something that really caught me. You said, you don't want the man telling you what to do. Why should anyone tell anyone else that they can't grow it or use it and do what they want with it? And you went on from there, but the end of the quote, you say, I'm not a user, but I do have a passion around individual rights and helping people build companies. The thing that caught me in what you were saying is that you don't use. It's rare that you find somebody in the cannabis industry who is as passionate about the industry and is not somebody who ingests in any way. Do you find that being a challenge? Because there's a lot, in other business, you do it over the golf course, right? And business is done there. In the cannabis industry, it's often done over a joint. So how have you found you're not using impacted your ability to do business with iAnthus?
Well, you'd actually be surprised the number of people who are in this business that aren't regular users. I've been actually surprised. I think people recognize that there's different skill sets, and I think the secret to success is finding out what people can be really great at, making sure they have the resources and get out of their way. And I think potential partners recognize that I bring a lot to the table from a capital markets strategy, balance sheet perspective that can be exceptionally helpful to their passion for the plant and the way they want to build their business. And it's that type of combination that's great. I mean, let's say I was the greatest grower in the world and I wanted to partner with the greatest grower in the world. There's no sort of synergy there, right? It's like, what do you need the other person for? But if you can take someone who's particularly good at positioning and telling a story and raising capital and combine that with someone who's the greatest grower in the world, that's great synergy. There's no overlap. You get the best of both worlds. And I think most of the leaders within the cannabis industry are savvy enough to understand that they're going to be better at things that I'm terrible at, and I'm going to be better at things that they're not good at. And it makes for a great combination.
I think it also shows there's the maturing of the marketplace, that the black market is now looking towards business leaders to really understand how to take this to the next level. And I think that it's showing great opportunity and great foresight for these companies. So. That's a great observation. I mean, look, any industry at its infancy and starting point, which this shift from black market to white market's been over the last whatever number of years, you get a lot of people in who are very passionate. That they talk derisively about the suits, but let's face it, it's a $50 billion black market. It's going to be $100 billion legal market when all is said and done. And there needs to be professionalism. If you're going to have good, high quality products that delight your customers and patients, you need to bring in things like Six Sigma. You need to bring in things like ERP systems. You can't manage something if you can't measure it, and that implies a certain level of professionalism that we're starting to see in the industry. It's not widespread, but I'll tell you, there's been a lot of improvement over the last 3 years. It is definitely moving in that direction.
And with hundreds of companies being public, you have to behave. If you're going to get the valuations, and we're going to talk about this, but if you're going to get the valuations that you want and you're going to survive as a public company, you have to behave not as a cannabis public company, just as a public company. So I think that's one of the things that you're modeling for a lot of other companies.
Well, that's absolutely right. I mean, being a public company, it has its positives, it has its negatives. I think one of the positives is the requirement for disclosure, transparency, truth, and that bright light is something that I think any industry that's wants to have access to growth capital and grow up, meeting those types of those rules are important.
So that's actually a good spot to take a quick break. We'll be right back. We're talking with Hadley Ford, the co-founder and CEO of iAnthus Capital.
More Green Rush coming up after we roll through our sponsors.
The smoke is rising, and the next crop of podcasts devoted to cannabis providers and enthusiasts are ready to be harvested. Welcome to the Cannabis Radio Network, founded by respected rainmakers who have been producing award-winning podcasts for over a decade. Industry headlines, business updates, medical reports, marketing, and e-commerce education rolled up perfectly for your consumption. Let's grow together. The Cannabis Radio Network. CannabisRadio.com.
Ignite the conversation on some trending topics along the Cannabis Radio social media network. Join our crew of thousands on our Cannabis Radio page on Facebook or at Canna Radio, CANNA Radio on Twitter. Plus, look for our Facebook and Google Plus pages for all of our original programs and connect with Dr. Dina, Kyle Cushman, Dr. Mitch Earlywine, Nurse Heather, Doc Rob, the hosts of Ganjapreneur, and more. Connect with the growing Cannabis Radio social crusade at Canna Radio on Twitter or search for Cannabis Radio on Facebook, Google Plus, and Instagram and grow with us.
Oh, let the marijuana llama tell you something now about a game for your phone gonna make you say, wow! The game's about the game of growing cannabis for cash. Grow the seed, sell the bud, put the savings in the stash. Little by little, your empire grows large. Put the big celebrities inside your entourage. You can choose to play with Snoop or me or Cheech and Chong, Cypress Hill, Willie Nelson, Wiz Khalifa with a bong. The name of the game is Hemp Inc., that's the point. Download and play while you light yourself a joint. The business of cannabis should be no crime. Hemp Inc. is even hot-proofed by the man who run High Times. Oh yeah? Get it on Android and iOS today. Marijuana llama out. Got to tend to me own crops, you know. Money don't make itself. Hemp Inc.
Banking and Buds, understanding the business of cannabis. Welcome back to The Green Rush, only on CannabisRadio.com.
So we are back on the Green Rush. We're talking with Hadley Ford, the CEO of iAnthus. So you were an aspiring engineer before being thrown out of the University of Rochester. I'm not going to ask you why, but after that you spent a lot of time.
I kind of want to know.
Well, we can ask later. But you hitchhiked. You were in Europe. You lived on the streets, literally as a performer, doing magic tricks and juggling. What lessons did busking teach you that you've applied to being a CEO? It must be, sales or something. Like what did that give you?
Well, I actually refer to a story that Lee Trevino told, the golfer, Hall of Fame golfer. It was popular back in the 60s and 70s. I forget what major tournament he was in, but he had like a 6-foot putt to win the major tournament. And he made the putt and he won the tournament. And the guy comes up afterwards and says, Mr. Trevino, you got the 6-foot putt to win the Masters or whatever. You must have felt a lot of stress and pressure before you struck that ball and won. He said, no, I didn't feel any stress or pressure. He goes, I'll tell you what stress and pressure is when you're a caddy and you're out and you're playing one of the guys that you caddy with for $20 and you're on the 18th hole. And if you miss the putt, you don't have the $20 in your pocket. That's what stress and pressure is about. And, if you are out as a street performer for 4 or 5 years, like I was, a lot of times you wake up in the morning, you didn't know where you're getting your money for a meal that day. So dealing with that type of uncertainty, dealing with that unknown piece that's sort of out there on a given day, that's what an entrepreneur does. Any given day, I don't know what challenge we're going to have to solve for, but that ability to be flexible and that ability to actually trust in yourself, trust in your team, trust in the people around you to solve it and get it done. That's probably the most valuable lesson I picked up by traveling around and juggling and doing all that magic stuff.
What made you happier, being the CEO of a public cannabis company or actually performing on the street?
Being CEO of a public cannabis company, I think when you're performing on the streets, you really can only impact yourself, really impact a couple of people who are watching you. When you're the CEO of a public cannabis company, you have an opportunity to impact patients, customers, shareholders, the community in which you're actually doing all this in, your employees, your partners. The ability to change and affect things for society more broadly is much greater. And I think anyone who's an entrepreneur just wants that option to affect that change. And I couldn't be happier from the seat that I'm sitting in now with that.
I think all of your shareholders just breathed a sigh of relief that juggling wasn't the answer to that question.
Yeah, that was a softball.
So let's talk U.S. versus Canada. You've said, and I'm going to throw your words right back at you. The U.S. markets are 3 years behind Canada in capital formation. I would expect the next 3 years for the U.S. to look more like the Canadian market. So do you still think that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it is still illegal in the United States. So you don't have any major law firms, accounting firms, and banks, commercial. They're on the sidelines. In Canada, you probably don't have your biggest funds investing in it. You're missing kind of the top banks. But you've got all your major law firms, all your major accounting firms. You do have a whole host of small to mid-sized institutions are involved in. You have salespeople, you have traders. It's a very fully functioning capital market, very sophisticated, very smart on the industry. And that's still way ahead of where we are in the U.S. Now, you're starting to see some interest down here. As I mentioned before, some of the mid-sized investment banks are looking at it. We've probably got half a dozen institutional investors who've bought our stock, but we're still well behind the Canadian markets from a capital formation perspective.
And in terms of valuation, so companies like Canopy, MedRelief, Aurora, and yours, you all trade on the Canadian stock exchanges, the CSC and the TSX. The valuations and between the Canadian companies and for the U.S. listed companies are very different. I mean, I think I know the answer, but why do you think that is?
I think people still are uncomfortable with the federal illegality in the United States. My own view is you shouldn't be spending your time, money, energy in this business if you don't think it's going to be regular way. So my guess is if you're an investor, you're getting a free call option. Whatever you invest in the United States right now, it will accrete to a normal valuation at some point, because ultimately we will have a legal market in the United States. The flip side of that is, hey, we're going back to the bad old dark days. I don't think anyone thinks that's going to happen. So, I think the U.S. investment opportunity. Yeah. Well,
does that mean
he can dream all he wants?
So for investors, should they be shorting then the Canadian stocks? Because if you look at the income, there are companies in the U.S. who have similar or bigger income than Aurora or Canopy on a quarterly basis, and the valuations are 100th the size. Would you be shorting? Amongst us chickens, would you be shorting these guys?
Well, look, people have to make their own trading strategies, and I do think that many of the Canadians have good opportunity. And frankly, it is a lower risk. It's not against the law up there. So from a risk-adjusted portfolio perspective, if I were running money, I'd probably have some of my portfolio in the Canadians. They're going to give you probably a lower return over time, but with less risk, less volatility, and that's probably the appropriate return you'd want. But I would clearly have some overweighting into the U.S. market. So you might lighten up a little bit on the Canadian side. You might overweight the U.S. side because you're going to get that accretion through time from an investment perspective. But I wouldn't short the whole sector in Canada. It's legal, it's viable. You've got great guys up there, and a lot of them are going to make a lot of money for their investors. And
had you said yes, I'm sure the guys up there would not have been very happy when they heard this. So it was well said. I'm sorry for putting you in that position.
No, but look, I look at it. I call it as I see it. It's sort of like, are there companies you should probably short in Canada? Sure. There's a lot of companies in the U.S. you should short as well. It's really about diligencing the team. I'm a big believer in picking the jockey, not the horse. That's why I think we've got a great team. I think we can execute. We bring a lot of expertise from outside of cannabis, and we bring that expertise to bear in the professionalism of the transition in cannabis. And I think people can make a lot of money in our stock. But they're going to make some money in Canada as well.
So your strategy of raising money in Canada and then spending it in the U.S. is really brilliant. I think. I mean, I'm not saying that because you're.
I'm not sure I've heard my name and brilliant in the same sentence before, but it's very kind and thank you. I appreciate your name.
I just said you, but no, it is. It's really smart. The TSX turned off the spigot, right? The Toronto Stock Exchange said that they are no longer allow companies to list on their market and raise capital in Canada if they have exposure physically in the U.S. And that has been a boon to the Canadian Stock Exchange. What do you think that this is going to do in general, both for the CSE and then overall for the ability for U.S. companies to raise institutional money in Canada?
Well, The Canadian Securities Exchange is open for business from a trading perspective. So, anyone who wants to list can list there, and they're very supportive and they're very good. You get great execution there. And I do think there's been a lot of clarity from the OSC, the CSA, CDS, that the OSC will continue to clear prospectus, CDS will continue to clear securities. So I think that access to U.S. companies is still viable in Canada. I think the road will be a lot more difficult. I think the OSC will have a real magnifying glass out, and you have to make sure your disclosure is good. But the market should broadly be open. What I really like, and I don't quite understand it, you've got all these Canadian giants. I mean, multi-billion-dollar companies with great IP portfolios, technology, hundreds of millions of dollars cash on the balance sheet, and they're in a market with 36 million people competing against 89 other players. And they're looking at the United States, the largest cannabis market on the planet. And if I'm a shareholder of one of those Canadian companies, I'm like, screw it. Like, delist from the TSX, list on CSE, and go spend some money in the United States. But they're not doing it, and I'm very happy they're not, because I don't have to compete against them. If the giants are at the border and the market's wide open for iAnthus to go state by state. So if I'm a shareholder of one of those large Canadian companies, I'm just going to say to them, hey, why are you sitting on the sidelines? Delist from the TMX and or TSXV and list on the CSE and go into the United States. It's the largest market in the world. You have a huge balance sheet. You've got tons of cash. You've got great IP, but they're not doing it. And I'm very happy they're not. You've got all these giants on the border that could be competing for great properties here in the U.S., but they're not. And that leaves the market wide open for a company like iAnthus to go state by state and build out an oligopoly type network.
So I think that's a good place for us to take another break. We are talking with Hadley Ford, the CEO of iAnthus, and you're listening to The Green Rush.
More Green Rush coming up after we roll through our sponsors.
Introducing 420 Cloud, ignited by MSIG, one of the fastest growing social apps around. The only app you'll need for all things cannabis. Find the latest cannabis news, videos, and stories, ranging from business and tech to sports and medicine. Start your career in cannabis by seeking, identifying, and applying for jobs through our expansive listings. For businesses, 420cloud.com features a full-scale cross-channel network, monetizing high traffic for big data conversion and analytics. Download 420 Cloud now from the iTunes Store or Google Play. MSIG.com is a publicly listed company on the OTC, symbol MCIG.
At Alternative Vibes, our core values of quality, loyalty, respect, and honesty guides us in our mission to help families find peace and harmony through our products and services. Whether you are looking for a more natural way of living, shopping essential oils, topicals, and edibles, or searching for a path towards achieving your goals, we are your choice. Learn more about our complete line of natural products and solutions at AlternativeVibes.com. Bringing quality of living to life. AlternativeVibes.com.
Cannabis concentrates have been around for hundreds of centuries. In 19th century America, extracts mixed with other herbs were sold as a miracle cure. Now, Apex Supercritical has elevated the science of extraction into the 21st century. Apex Supercritical is the leader in CO2 extraction, which is the cleanest, safest, and purest way to extract plant oils. ROI in as little as 3 weeks. Our cost-effective systems are fully automated with an industry-leading 3-year warranty. And if we don't have your system in stock, we can build one in as little as 4 weeks, bringing CO2 extraction to the masses. Learn more at APEKSSupercritical.com. 4-week build excludes high production systems.
Banking and Buds, understanding the business of cannabis. Welcome back to The Green Rush, only on CannabisRadio.com.
Welcome back. I'm Louis Goldberg with Ann Donahoe, the hostess with the mostess, and you are listening to The Green Rush. So Hadley, recently you guys bought Citiva in New York State, and New York is by any measure a failed cannabis market. Why would you buy in New York now?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by a failed cannabis market. You're talking about a failed medical program that was launched with not a lot of indications 3 years ago, then I'd agree with you. But as a cannabis market, I think you may have seen that it was recently listed as the #1 cannabis market on the planet. More cannabis is purchased in New York than in any other city on the globe, and it is going to be an unbelievable market. From a medical perspective, it's only going to expand. You're only going to have more indications, more ingestion methods. At some point, the state's going to have to go full rec. You're going to have full rec in Massachusetts. You're going to have full rec in New Jersey. And the New York market's going to have to move in that direction. So we see it as, a patient strategy. We got in at a very reasonable price with some great partners, and we'll bide our time. And at some point in the next, 2, 3, 4 years, I think that market's going to be one of the best in the United States, if not the world.
We actually spoke with New York State Senator Liz Krueger a couple of weeks ago, maybe even last week. Time flies. And so if she has anything to do with it, hopefully sooner rather than later, New York will see rec actually happen. So I'm going to take a little left turn here. Cannabis is actually a family business for you. Can you talk about how your other family members are involved?
Oh, sure. Well, it goes back to my mother and father back in the 60s. We had a little tiny farm in Connecticut that we grew Christmas trees on, had a little truck farm, vegetables, stuff like that. And there was a piece of the back acre that had what my mother told my grandmother were French marigolds. So we had a crop. True
That's
story. Typically, the neighborhood kids would wait until the harvest was ready. They come in and steal all the plants and irritate the hell out of my parents. But then years later,
and you don't use.
Yeah, well, it's stranger things have happened.
It's true.
Yeah. I was like that Michael J. Fox character, and what was that, Family, whatever it was?
Family Ties.
Family Ties. I'd be walking around with the briefcase, and my brother and sister just be making fun of me. But
the picture of Richard Nixon on your wall.
I didn't go that far. But you fast forward years later, my brother was in media. And he was living in New Mexico. He had a pretty good little sort of ad agency, and the cannabis stuff came along, and he thought, this would be fun. He sat down at his kitchen table, applied for a license, and got one. He's now the largest market share provider in the state. About a year or two after that, they came up with a medical program in Vermont. So my brother helped my sister launch that, and she got a license. But one of the things that we used to, brothers and sisters, we talk on the phone, every couple of weeks, and one of the things that they always said was a problem was access to money. And they would describe the business to me, and I'd say, but this seems ludicrous to me that you can't get a bank to lend you money. It's big cash flowing businesses, but you couldn't. So I got involved with my partner Randy to really initially solve that capital formation problem, and then it morphed from there into really just being an owner and operator ourselves. So my brother and sister were co-founders of the company as well. They're actually partners of ours in Vermont and New Mexico, and that's really where it all came about from.
I'm sorry. I still love the idea of you also grew up on a Christmas tree farm. Kind of my dream.
Well, I'll tell you an amusing story about that one time. That the customers would come in and they would tag their tree with a little orange ribbon, and then my father would go out and cut it down later for them. And one time I was about 6 or 7 years old, and I was walking through it, and I saw these orange ribbons. And I was like, what are all these orange ribbons doing on the trees? And I took them all off. So my father had no idea whose Christmas tree was whose.
That is, wow, that's great. So we are at the segment of the show that we do with everybody, which is Puff, Puff, Pass. Just rapid fire, 2 things that you love about the industry and 1 thing that's driving you nuts.
I love the size. I love the opportunity. I think the piece that drives me nuts is really all the regulatory rigmarole you have to do, state by state without any federal oversight to it. So the illegality on a federal basis just causes all sorts of problems that we shouldn't have to face.
And that is the winner, by the way, for anybody who's heard the podcast in the past, the single fastest Puff Puff Pass in the history of the show, which was awesome.
Oh, and I thought,
by the way,
I thought I was taking my time.
Oh, no, that's how we envisioned it. I mean, we've had guys who've been like 45 minutes later, and my second puff is, it's like, no, it's not.
Or there's 16 puffs and no pass.
If you can't put it on the back of a business card, you can't sell it. You can't sell it. You can't raise money. You can't raise money. You don't have a business. So you got to be laser focused no matter what you do. That's the key to success. Ideas are a dime a dozen. Execution, that's what takes you over the finish line.
That was awesome. And I think, that is a perfect spot for us to end. Thank you so much for joining us. We've been speaking with Hadley Ford, the CEO of iAnthus, and to learn more about him and check out the company, please go to ianthuscapital.com, which is ianthuscapital.com. On Twitter, it's at iAnthusCapital, and the stock trades on the Canadian exchange at CNSX, and the ticker symbol is IAN. Thank you, as always, to Nick Opich for helping produce this, and Brasco Over the Top Rope for helping produce this podcast. If you want to chat with us, you can find us on Instagram and Twitter with the handle at GreenRushComms, as well as at kcsa.cannabis.com, and we will have some big news about that coming up shortly, by the way. You can drop us an email at greenrush@kcsa. And don't forget to subscribe. Press that little button up there on your iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you're listening to this. We appreciate it, and have a great day, everybody.
The opinions expressed on this CannabisRadio.com program are those of the guests and hosts and do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of CannabisRadio.com. Any rebroadcast or redistribution without proper consent of CannabisRadio.com is prohibited.